Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In today's lecture, we'll talk about Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. It was a group of 7 members who took inspiration from medieval literature and especially from romantic poetry, and they wanted the artistic spirit to set straight. They thought that art had distracted from their original path, and they wanted to portray meaningful, colorful, true descriptive paintings with the familiarity with the poetry. So we'll have a look at what they painted and who were the poets they took inspiration from. Let's start with today's lecture. So it was 7 members group, as I have already mentioned. The key members that we need to keep in our mind were William Holman Hunt, John Everett Millais, D.G Rossetti. The rest of the members are important, but it's not advisable to memorize their names. So how they started, how they ended up forming this brotherhood. So it was a royal exhibition. On this royal exhibition in 1848, Dante Gabriel Rossetti met William Holman Hunt. So he was actually displaying his painting, The Eve of Saint Agnes. We'll have a look at that painting and we'll talk further. So they believe that the academies or these exhibitions are actually not focusing on innovative techniques or something that could be considered as lost. So they are too traditional, they are too conventional, so they went their own way. It's important to remember that they were mostly under 25 years age. Okay, this is a John Keats poem. So William Holman Hunt displayed this painting. So it became a source of inspiration for Dante Gabriel Rossetti. It's important to remember that John Keats wrote a poem, The Eve of Saint Agnes, in 1819, and it is a narrative poem written in a Spenserian stanza, 42 Spenserian stanza. So set in a medieval setting. So William Holman Hunt took inspiration and painted that painting on a canvas. So Hunt introduced Rossetti to John Everett Millais, and the rest is history. And this is how they founded the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, which is also known as PRB. So they did not last long, but they left indelible marks in the history. Key characteristics of Pre-Raphaelite art: they focused nature in detail, they painted detailed, vivid, and realistic description of nature. Intense color, they used bold colors, bright colors. Symbolism and mythology was very common. They relied on medieval Arthurian legends, biblical events, medieval literature. They focused poetry. They took inspiration from romantic poets, from Victorian poets, Tennyson, Browning, John Keats. The romanticism and emotional expression can be observed in their paintings. So they embraced the ideas of romanticism, individuality, and all of those spiritual themes that can be observed in American literature too. Moreover, they try to portray things as it is, realism, and rejected the academic conventions or idealization portrayal of things. So this was their motive. They thought that the art had strayed from the truth of nature, actually distracted from their true path. So in other words, painters did not paint what they wanted to paint. So simply they thought it should be a convention, though it should be a traditional thing. They did not let their emotions come in this painting. They did not let their senses involve in these artistic pursuits. If we have a look at John Everett Millais, a very important and founding member of Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, he was a painter, illustrator, one of the founding members. So he actually his masterpiece. We have a look at the masterpiece. They actually used real lifelike models. Elizabeth Siddal was a very important model who became the wife of D.G Rossetti. Elizabeth Siddal. They used original models. So his masterpiece, Ophelia, was meant to become one of the most famous painting in the British art. It was actually based on Shakespeare's play Hamlet. He was just his scene is just when he is drowned in a stream, and she has let herself fall in the river. So Millais was the first artist to depict Ophelia in that painting. So his model was actually Elizabeth Siddal, who later became the wife of D.G Rossetti. So if we have a close look at these paintings, we will come to know that the colors, the bright flowers, the stream, and each and everything can be observed from in very closer perspective. So Ophelia by John Everett Millais could be considered a very important picture of a Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. They set 4 rules at their artistic individuals: to have genuine ideas to express, to study nature attentively, to sympathize with what is direct and serious, heartfelt in previous art. Most indispensable of all, to produce thoroughly good pictures and statues. So the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood agreed on all of these things, and they portrayed, pictured, displayed all of those things in their paintings. Moreover, if we have a look at these 2 paintings, one is a conventional painting by Charles Locke Eastley. This one, Charles Locke Eastley, and one is the similar theme by William Holman Hunt. This one. So if we compare with these 2 paintings, we'll come to know that how William Holman Hunt has paid attention to the details, the posture of the bodies, the description of their figures and their features, especially bodily features. Moreover, if we have a look at the background, we can easily conclude that nature is also given importance. The color, the brightness, even the person standing right at the right top corner can be easily observed. Whereas if we have a look at this painting, even the facial features or the background is not even clear. So this is the thing that PRB wanted to highlight and depict in their theatrical and idealized version. So the problem, according to these artists, was the influence of a very important Renaissance artist, Raphael. So Raphael was considered one of the greatest artists of all time, who inspired all of the artists and was very popular. So they thought that Raphael influence was too much on the English artists. So they wanted to let his influence loose and to emulate early Renaissance artists. So they wanted to actually disparage the influence of Raphael. So though they focused on other important artists, we'll have a look at the Sandro Botticelli. They called themselves PRB. Their goal was to restore the freedom. Their goal was to restore freedom and truthfulness of the art and the love of nature, that we can have a look at the previous picture. So their favorite painter was actually Sandro Botticelli. This one. So this Sandro Botticelli was with their favorite painter, and if we have a closer look at these important paintings, like Sandro Botticelli painted a picture on canvas, we can see the difference, that nature is very crucial and important aspect of Sandro Botticelli painting. And if we compare it with the Raphael, we can see that nature is not given important. It's just background for Raphael. And if we have a look at the child or their facial expression of the mother, we can easily conclude that still importance has not been given to their faces. So it's merely a background. Nature is merely a background, whereas nature for Botticelli is very crucial, important, colorful, detailed, and simple, harmonious with the description of even colors. You can have a look at the colors. You can easily understand that he gave importance to the painting, to the flaws as well. So they were 7 in number. So John Ruskin was actually their supporter, who supported them in a very famous book, Modern Painters. He wrote to go to nature in all singleness of heart, rejecting nothingness, selecting nothing and scorning. So it was his motto, and he actually motivated these PRB members. So PRB members received a lot of criticism. We have a look at that, who wrote what kind of criticism about them. Dante Gabriel Rossetti, The Daydream. We can see that a Botticellian influence in his painting. Nature is not in background here. It's the part of life. You can see that the detailed boughs, leaves of a sycamore are indispensable part of the painting. So it's fully intertwined with the subject. So we can have a close look at how the girl has held the stem in his hand. So we can have a close look that these things are so much interconnected that nature has become the part of the characters as well. D.G Rossetti, Dante's Dream on the Day of Death of Beatrice by Dante Gabriel Rossetti. So Elizabeth Siddals, who was the wife of Rossetti's death, who was the wife of D.G Rossetti, and he depicted that largest painting. He depicted his wife in that kind of painting. He took inspiration from Dante's Dream. The name of Dante's poem was The New Life. So he took inspiration from Dante's poem, The New Life, and he actually wanted to give an honor to Dante's because he was too much inspired from D.G Rossetti. So if we move to the next slide, we can have a look at the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, who were the part of this 7 members. They, in 1854, they were completely broke away. They were splitted and they had gone their own ways, but their style persisted, and they left many followers who continued to emulate their style in the 19th century too, until the arrival of Futurism, Expressionism, and other artistic movements. They also took inspiration from the Romantic poetry as well. So another trait of these Pre-Raphaelite art is the use of vivid and colorful colors, vivid luminous colors. We can have a look at all of these 4 paintings by D.G Rossetti. The result was more a lifelike intensity lifelike intensity can be observed in all of these pictures, instead of observing something that has no life, that has become no affinity with the nature, no attraction as well. Romantic poetry of Keats and new Gothic poetry of Tennyson and Browning. It was the inspiration of these artists. So they took inspiration from Browning, from medieval folk tales, from the legends, from biblical texts, from Arthurian legends for inspiration. They even painted their visions. So Love Among Ruins by Edward Burne-Jones was based on a poem by Robert Browning. So Love Among Ruins is a poem by Robert Browning. So they actually portrayed that painting on a canvas. So Edward Burne-Jones, Pre-Raphaelite, he was fascinated by medieval literature and history and legend. He took inspiration from Robert Browning's poem, Love Among Ruins. So the painting in this Pre-Raphaelite style features 2 lovers, 1 and 2. They are seated among the destructive or the decaying ruins of any house or building. So this is how we can say that they took inspiration from the Victorian and Romantic poets to their themes of love, spirituality, Christianity, or from medieval literature can be easily observed in these paintings. Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, if we have a look at the Lady of Shalott, a figure from the 13th century Italian legend, was popularized by the poetry of Alfred Tennyson. It featured many times in Pre-Raphaelite art. So this painting of John William Waterhouse was an inspiration of Alfred Tennyson's poem, Lady of Shalott. It is an Arthurian legend. It actually comes from Arthurian legend. It's an iconic example of how they emulated medieval and also took inspiration from Romantic and Victorian poets. It's a very famous painting. It's based on a poem by Alfred Tennyson. Uh, it set in the times of King Arthur, the legend. Moreover, the subject of this tragic love story was very common in artists of that period. Especially in this poem, we can easily observe that how the Lady of Shalott, which portrays the story of a woman who suffers from a curse. So it can be easily observed in the painting of John William Waterhouse. The art of Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood was filled with color, with flaws, with colors, detail, description. I have already mentioned again and again. Yet they were criticized, they were mocked, they were ridiculed, and most of the people thought that they are too ugly and they are not even following the religious conventions of that time. We can have a look at that, how different people criticize them. So it was only the John Ruskin who came to rescue them, who supported them, who wrote pamphlet in favor of them. So along with the John Ruskin support, they continued to do paintings, but they did not go without criticism. Many people criticized them, and we can have a look at Charles Dickens, a very important and Victorian novelist, criticized them. So the most important attack came from Charles Dickens, the Times magazine, different newspapers. So we can say that he called them Pre-Raphaelite, considered for the lowest death of what is mean, odious, repulsive, and revolting. On the 7th May of 1851, the Times called them addicting themselves to a monkish style, monkish follies, indulging in monkish follies, morbid infatuation, un-English. They even called them un-English. On 13th May, Ruskin again came to rescue them, and they even supported them that their art nobler than has been seen for 300 years. Still, after this all controversy, Charles Dickens won, and John Ruskin was not supported in all of this fiasco. A Fleshy school of poetry was an important fierce attack on Pre-Raphaelite school by William Janan. He wrote essays with the pseudonym Thomas Midland. So they called the artistic painting of these Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood as an immoral. So this was the view of Charles Dickens too, because we believe that Victorian poets, artists, all of those people who were living in that period were actually moralists. They thought according to the morality, what is good and what is wrong. So believed on these ideologies. They did not think that it's appropriate to portray the paintings of religious deities or something like that. Similar. Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, it actually motivated, influenced the movement like expressionism, symbolism, and even surrealism. So we can have if we have a close look at all of these things one by one, we can see that the Pre-Raphaelite roots are very evident. So these symbolists drew inspiration from Rossetti, especially in terms of description of mystical art or art focusing on spirituality. A very important member of Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood was Frederic George Stephens. So he painted a picture taken from Geoffrey Chaucer's 14th Canterbury Tale. It's from Clark's Tale, and Stephen actually, if you have a look at the bottom of this picture, you can have a look at this name, Frederic George Stephens. I'm going to write it here. Frederic George Stephens. So he painted this image. He even submitted that painting in the Royal Academy, but it was rejected and it remained in his possession. So this was an important aspect of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. And by the 1920s, this Pre-Raphaelite art was completely diminished, disregarded, outdated. considered as a Victorian, brash, unruly in comparison to Cubism, Futurism, and other artistic modern movements. That could be considered as understandable as a part of life or artistic spirit happens with the literary movements and literary trends too. We can have a close similarity with this Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood and with an innovative style adopted by Ezra Pound and his fellows that could be that is quite similar to their artistic spirit that we can that we term as that we know as Imagist movement, quite dissimilar, but one followed in poetry and one in art in artistic spirit. So this all happened in the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. If you want to have a further study of all this important facts and details, you can read from this website. You can also search from Wikipedia. I hope these lectures will help understand most of the problems, most of the ideas, or most of the concepts that are actually associated with Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. So it was a very short-lived group, but they continued to depict, they continued to write, they continued to paint on the canvases, and they continued to influence until 1920s. And still their influence can be observed in various modern painting when brightful colors are used, where artistic, where especially the special attention is given to the individual plus background with vivid description of colors. I hope you have liked this lecture. Thank you very much. Allah Hafiz.